Okay, so this is the third video in a series on how to read and interpret the Uniform System of Accounts for restaurants. And these lecture notes are available on iLearn, same place as before. So if you go to the iLearn site, to the section labeled USARI, these are the lecture notes, and this is the Excel file that I'll be working off of. So the first two videos in this series were on how to read Uniform System of Accounts edition 8, how to read Uniform System of Accounts 7th edition, and the video on the 7th edition had some of the compare and contrast on what was the difference between the two types, the two editions, the formats of the two editions. This particular video is going to concentrate on how to kind of make the comparison and how to process and analyze the profit and loss. What makes the profit and loss statement different from one operation to the next, and kind of what are the warning signs or indicators to look at when you're evaluating a profit and loss in a USARI format. Okay, so if I go back to the lecture notes to these, right? The first step that you want to go and do when you're just presented with a plain old P&L is to calculate the common sized version of P&L. So if you're given a straight up P&L, right? If you're given a straight up P&L that that just looks like this, the next thing you want to do is to calculate the percentage column, the common sized column, okay? And look at the formulas within the Excel sheet to figure out how to calculate that. But just remember, again, all of line items are as a percentage of total sales, except for the cost of sales line items, which are a percentage of their respective sales lines, okay? So calculate the common sized version is the first step, okay? The second step is now to compare your operation against some other operation. You want to compare the common sized versus the common size of another comparable operation. Now, your question may be, well, how do I know what a comparable operation might be? So just like when you're choosing a comp set for a hotel, right? You want to choose a comp set for your restaurant based on the operational characteristics of your restaurant. So a few of the considerations you might want to take into account are the size of your operation, right? Because how big or small your restaurant is going to kind of dictate some of the big line items inside your restaurant. A restaurant with more seats inside of it, right, will probably have will probably take up more real estate, right? So you'll have a bigger building. Your occupancy costs will be a little bit higher. The number of employees that you have that are necessary to staff the place are going to be higher. If the size of the operation is larger, presumably your repairs and maintenance expenses might be a little bit higher. So the size of the operation is a big consideration to take into account. Now, depending on what the concept is, the level of service that you provide in the restaurant is also going to be an indication of, whether or not you have a good comp set. So try to choose competitors or comparables that offer the same level of service. Are you full service? Are you a full service establishment, or are you a limited service establishment? Limited service meaning like the Chipotles or the McDonald's of the world, where you don't have a server at your, to take your order and bring your order to you and then bus your table, but rather maybe you order up at a counter, or it's a to-go concept or a grab-and-go concept. Those are all limited service concepts. But even within a limited service, right, you have really limited service where maybe it's self-serve, right, on one end. Maybe it's a concept where you have a buffet, right, where it's kind of a mix of limited and full service, right? So nobody's taking your order, nobody's bringing food to your table, but somebody is bussing your table for you after you leave, and it is a sit-down, dine-in type of place, right? So a buffet would kind of be the middle of these two. Full service would mean somebody comes to your table, takes your order, brings you your food, takes away your plates, busses your table afterwards, brings you a check. So that would be full service. But even within full service, you can imagine that super fancy full service places, right, will have maybe a waiter, a back waiter, and a busser, and a maitre d' and a sommelier, right? So depending on the level of, how much service and the quality of the service that's being provided. You want to kind of match all of those factors up when choosing a comp set for level of service, right? And level of service, this is really going to dictate whether you have similar levels of labor and benefits and management levels. So that's why you want to look at level of service. Similarly, the food concept, you want to choose something that has a similar food concept. So that's not to say that Italian restaurants can only choose comparables that are other Italian restaurants. Think of, so that's, choosing by cuisine type, which helps, right? But you also don't want to match a pizza joint up against, an Olive Garden up against a Buca di Beppo, right? Because there are other factors of service that are slightly off, and the type of food that they're offering is going to be slightly off, right? So think of ingredient types, ingredient qualities. If your concept is all about local and sustainability, but you're Italian, right? Maybe you find some other local and sustainable concept that may or may not be Italian, because the types of ingredients that you're going to be using are comparable. So you may choose someplace based upon like the similarity of types of ingredients that you use, right? So an Italian seafood restaurant may want to choose the Red Lobster as a comparable, right? Red Lobster's not Italian, but both concepts serve a lot of seafood. You may also want to choose food concept-wise based on average check, right? Average check is a very good proxy for the expensiveness of the food at a concept. So you may want to choose, you may make the assumption that places that have similar average checks offer the same level of food or quality of food. So that may be a proxy that you use. Complexity of the items served. So this is to say, is it a concept that makes most of their stuff in-house, or do they buy pre-made already someplace? Because concepts that tend to buy pre-made, maybe their cost structures look similar to each other because they're all outsourcing their types of, they're all outsourcing their labor, and maybe their food cost is a little bit higher because they're buying pre-processed foods, okay? Similarly, the level of preparation, how much prep is done in-house. If you do butchery in-house, you probably want to find another concept that does butchery in-house. If you do all your baking in-house, all of your desserts in-house, you're probably going to want to find a concept that does bakery and desserts in-house as well, because the food costs are probably going to look a little similar. Okay, so similar food concepts will generally have similar direct operating expenses, so that line item, direct operating expenses, because the small wares that they use and the equipment that they use, the small equipment that they use will likely be the same. Cost of goods sold will likely be the same. So if they're making the same type of food, doing the same level of preparation, then they are probably going to have the same level of cost of goods sold. Okay. How old your operation is versus somebody else's operation. You're going to want to try to find a concept that's about the same age as your concept, because this is really going to depend, this is really going to drive, right, the depreciation and amortization level inside your operation, and then the repair and maintenance expenses. If you're running a very old operation, right, that has been around for a very long time, the equipment's been around for a very long time, you're probably going to have higher repair and maintenance expenses. So you probably want to find another concept that has fairly old equipment also, to kind of see what their repairs and maintenance percentages are. Depreciation and amortization, right? If you own all of your equipment and you own the leasehold improvements and the building, and your operation is super old, presumably you've depreciated away all the book value of that PP&E, of that property, plant, and equipment. So you would want to find a similar operation that has similar ownership and depreciation statuses to compare against. The location of the operation is another good way to choose a comparable, and this is primarily to find a similar occupancy costs. Look for other operations that are in your major metropolitan area. So, for example, in San Francisco, if we're trying to find out what occupancy costs are looking like in Union Square, we're probably going to want to find another Union Square operation to compare ourselves against. It's not really, worthwhile to compare occupancy costs of an operation in Union Square and compare that to someplace like the Tenderloin, right? The occupancy costs, the rent costs are going to be very, very different. Similarly, if you're planning on opening up a restaurant in Modesto, right? Picking a restaurant concept that is located in Union Square is not gonna do a lot in telling you what the occupancy costs should be like in Modesto. So urban versus rural versus suburban. Try to choose a comparable that is similar in kind of area designation to your concept. Okay. One big thing to watch out for though is location-wise, occupancy costs will vary for reasons other than where you're located. It will also vary greatly depending on whether the operation that you've chosen as your comparable owns or leases its real estate. So, you know, you may be a concept in Union Square, and you found another restaurant that's also located in Union Square, and you're like, oh wow, their occupancy costs should be very, very similar because they're both in Union Square. They're both major metropolitan areas, locations, and their locations are very, very similar. But when you look at the two numbers, the occupancy costs are very different. It's because one concept could own the building that it's in which case the occupancy cost might be very low because it's not paying rent, right? The ownership shows up as depreciation expense on the building. It doesn't show up as rent expense, right? It's just like a mortgage versus paying rent. Those are two very different line items, and occupancy cost is most likely reflected in the rent line. So whether your comparable company, right, owns its real estate or leases its real estate is going to be the biggest factor in what the occupancy cost actually is. So you're going to have to find a comparable that is in about the same type of location that your operation is in, but you're also going to have to make sure that that place, you know, owns or leases in the same way that you own or lease your building and property. Okay. Okay, so that's how you would choose a comparable. Once you've chosen a good comparable, right, in terms of the size of the operation, the level of service, your comparable has similar food concept, is of approximately the same age, and has similar location and lease versus own profile as your operation, you have a good comparable now. Now it's time to start comparing yourself to that comparable. So you can compare to the comparable that you found, but you can also look up within the Deloitte & Touche NRA Restaurant Industry Operations Report, which is also posted up on iLearn. I'm going to show you where real quickly. So if you go to the iLearn site, you'll notice that go all the way down to, again, where we are inside the course. And here you have Deloitte & Touche NRA Industry Operations Report, and I'm just going to click on that. Okay. And it's a very, very large packet here. And this just happens to be the 2013-2014 edition. And let's say that you've decided on a, let's just say, let's just say that you have decided to, you know, find a comparable that is a full service restaurant with an average check range of this and this. Okay. This packet, this Deloitte & Touche NRA, National Restaurant Association report offers a common-sized income statement for different profiles of restaurants. So in this case, section B profiles full-service restaurants with average check ranges of this to this, right? It also breaks it out by type of establishment, the sales volume, the menu theme, location, if it's like in a major metropolitan area or if it's in a suburban area, and average check. So let's just say that I'm going to narrow it down plainly by average check and full service restaurant. I'm going to go to performance measure with a certain number of employees. Let's go to B4. Section. So B3, B4, okay. So I'm getting closer. Number of paid employees. It tells me the number of employees that these places will generally have. And my comparable will also show me, right, full service restaurants with this type of average check, what their sales are per number of employees, right? I'm going to keep on scrolling down, and here you go. So on Exhibit B8, it gives me the common-sized income statement. In Uniform System of Accounts 7th edition format. You'll notice that this is kind of the 7th edition format. Well, it's kind of a combination, 7th and 8th edition. It's kind of like this weird hybrid. Okay, it breaks out versus other controllable and not. Oh, so maybe more 8th edition than anything else. Okay, but this is your common size out here, the last 3 columns. So it's ratio to total sales. The way that you would read this is the lower quartile, median, and the upper quartile. So the upper quartile is the highest 25% of the population, right? Out of all the restaurants that filled out the survey that reported, that were studied, the top 25% that recorded the highest percentage of, right, a food cost, of alcoholic beverage cost, the ones that reported the highest percentage of food sales relative to total sales, the respondents that reported the highest level of alcoholic beverage sales relative to total sales. So this is like the highest. So this column kind of reflects the highest end of the range. Okay, this is kind of the median range. So in the kind of in the middle, not the average, but the middle point. And then these are the people who reported the lowest percentage, right? So of everybody that reported during 2013, 2014, right, the people who reported the lowest cost of sales reported 28.3% cost of sales. They reported, so the people who had the lowest food cost percentage of full service restaurants with this average check range, they reported a 30.2% food cost. The people who reported the highest food cost percentage reported a 40% food cost percentage. So realize that reading from all the way from sales down to income before income taxes, this is not reflective of one company, right? It's not reflective of any one operation. It's just it's a composite of everybody who reported the highest amount, right? So presumably, you know, people who reported really high food costs would have reported lower labor costs. So you can't just add straight down and get this number, right? Because this is a hodgepodge of a bunch of different operations. So this is just on the highest side. This is on the lowest side for each line item. And this is kind of the middle of the road reporting for each line item. So the way you'd read this is each line item is independent of any other line item in this chart. Okay, so if I were to compare our sample operation, so I'm just gonna make this a little bit smaller. I'm gonna go back to our lecture notes. If I were to compare, right, our operation, our food and beverage split is 75% to 22%, right? 75% of our sales were food, 22% of our sales were beverages, were alcoholic beverages. That's about the median, right? We're a little low on the food side, and we're a little higher on the beverage side. So we are a little bit in our sample income statement. This place is a little beverage heavier than the typical operation, right? It's a little slightly beverage heavier, a little food light. And that's because we have this weird merchandise line, because maybe we sell t-shirts and mugs or something. So, you know, we sell more beverages, right? A larger portion of our sales go to beverages than normal, than average. than the median, and a little less of our sales come from food than the median. Okay. Our food cost percentage is 29%, which is far lower than even the lower quartile, right? So we're below the lowest quartile. So we're doing a pretty good job of controlling our food expenses. Our beverage expenses are 22%, again, which is lower than the lowest quartile. So we're doing a very good job of controlling our costs. On the labor end of things, so this is where it kind of looks like Uniform System of Accounts 7th edition, but kind of 8th edition also. Our labor costs are 31.4%. It's just kind of the lump sum here, which is a little lower than the median, right? We're not on the lowest end, but we're a little bit lower than the median, so we're doing a pretty good job of controlling our labor also. Okay. Can't really do a comparison on prime cost. Our direct operating expenses are a little higher than the median, but by no means out of control. Music and entertainment, we're spot on with the industry. Our marketing is much higher than the median. It's almost on the upper quartile, right? So we seem to be spending a lot of our money on marketing, like a heavier portion of our money on marketing than most people are. We're almost in the upper quartile of people who spend on marketing. That's how much we're spending on marketing. Our utility services, we are very high on utilities, so 4.8%, right? And it could be that, maybe we're in California and our electric rates are just higher, or maybe we're buying carbon offsets or something like that. I don't know, but this is raising a little alarm bell because we're above the upper quartile here. So I would examine why our utility expenses are so high. Our general and administrative is 5%. Again, we're also above the upper quartile, and this is worth examining and looking into why our general and administrative is so high. Although I'm looking at this on the lower quartile, and that's very low. This probably means this place doesn't, these places generally don't accept credit cards, because credit card fees would just gobble that percentage up completely. This is about what a credit card service fee would be, right? 2% of all credit card sales. So maybe these guys just do a lot of cash transactions. That would be an explanation. Our repairs and maintenance are on the high side here, right? So it's above the upper quartile. So I would be asking myself why our repair and maintenance expenses are so high. Non-controllable expenses, our occupancy costs, 7.2%, which is above the median, but not, out of control on the upper quartile end. This starts getting into the ouch range, where it becomes increasingly difficult to sustain profitability, and we're already kind of on the high side. Depreciation and amortization, we're middle of the road. Equipment leases, we are kind of on the high side, but nothing unreasonable. Corporate overhead, interest expenses, all seem to be fairly in line. This really isn't a reflection on the operations, right? Because all the operating stuff was taken care of above, and this is non-operations. It's more financing decisions than anything else. Okay, so our income and loss, 10.4%, which is definitely on the high side. And our explanation for a lot of this, why we're doing so well, is we seem to have very tight control over our cost of sales, right? Our total cost of sales. We seem to be doing a very, very good job. We're even below the lowest quartile, and we seem to be doing a fairly decent job of controlling our labor expenses too. And that would be the majority of why we have such strong EBIT for the operation. Okay, so this is the way that you would go ahead and make a comparison, how you would find your comparable, right? You would look up comparable operation in the Deloitte & Touche National Restaurant Association Industry Operations Report, and then you would go through line by line and kind of see where you're kind of comparing yourself to the middle of the road versus, the people who have the highest level versus the people who have the lowest level of each individual line item, and then discuss from there. And that's about it for you know, how you would compare your performance against that of a benchmark. So our benchmark here is from the Deloitte & Touche Industry Operations Report.